Hey guys! Tonight we explore a habit that would seem incredibly strange to most people today. What if I told you that, for much of the Middle Ages, sleeping through the entire night in one uninterrupted stretch may have been considered unusual? Imagine waking in the darkness sometime after midnight, not because of a loud noise or a stressful dream, but because everyone around you expected it. For a medieval villager, those quiet hours between two periods of sleep were often just another ordinary part of life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these journeys through history. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see people joining from every corner of the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe crack open a window if there's a cool breeze outside, or turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Settle into your favorite chair or pull the blanket a little higher. And let's quietly step back nearly 700 years. Imagine arriving in a small English village around the year 1320. The sun has disappeared behind the fields. Smoke rises gently from dozens of thatched cottages as families finish preparing the evening meal. Chickens have settled into their roosts. Dogs curl beside the fire. Somewhere in the distance, the slow ringing of a church bell reminds everyone that another day has come to an end. Without electric lights, darkness arrives quickly. Modern cities rarely experience true night. Street lights glow. Windows shine with televisions and computer screens. Even at 2 o'clock in the morning, many places remain bright enough to read a book outdoors. The medieval world was different. When the last daylight faded, the countryside became astonishingly dark. On cloudy nights, you might barely see your own hand stretched out before your face. Stars provided gentle light, but only when the skies were clear. Candles existed, of course, but they were valuable. Burning one for several unnecessary hours was rather like leaving all the lights on in your house simply because you enjoyed the atmosphere. Possible, certainly, but expensive. As a result, most people naturally aligned their daily routines with the rising and setting of the sun. During summer, this meant long working days and relatively short nights. During winter, however, darkness seemed almost endless. In parts of northern Europe, people could experience 15 or 16 hours between sunset and sunrise. That creates an interesting problem. Very few human beings naturally sleep for 16 uninterrupted hours. Even after a physically exhausting day of farming, weaving, blacksmithing, or carrying water, most people simply did not remain asleep from dusk until dawn. Instead, something remarkable happened. Many historians believe medieval Europeans commonly divided the night into two separate periods of sleep. The first was often called the first sleep. Several hours later came a peaceful period of wakefulness. Only then did people return for their second sleep. At first, this sounds almost unbelievable. Surely everyone throughout history simply slept the way most people do today. Surprisingly, historical records suggest otherwise. The evidence appears in personal diaries, medical writings, court records, religious texts, poems, and even ordinary conversations recorded hundreds of years ago. People casually mentioned waking after their first sleep as though no explanation were necessary. That detail is important. Writers usually explain unusual behavior. They rarely explain ordinary behavior. If someone today wrote, "After breakfast I walked to work," nobody would ask what breakfast was. Likewise, medieval authors often referred to first sleep and second sleep without stopping to define them. Their readers already understood. It was simply part of everyday life. Of course, not every village followed identical customs. Europe was enormous, stretching across different climates, languages, and cultures. Customs varied from region to region. History rarely offers simple answers that apply equally to millions of people. Still, enough independent sources point toward this sleeping pattern that historians continue to study it with great interest. Now imagine yourself inside one of those cottages. The room is small. Perhaps only a single space serves as kitchen, dining room, bedroom, and workshop all at once. A fire burns gently inside the hearth. Its warmth fills the room with the comforting smell of wood smoke. The walls are rough. The furniture is simple. Life contains few luxuries. Yet the cottage feels familiar in one important way. A family gathers together before bed. They talk quietly about tomorrow's work. Someone repairs a shoe. Someone else spins wool by the fading firelight. Children gradually become sleepy. Eventually the fire grows smaller. The household settles beneath blankets stuffed with straw or wool. Outside, the village becomes silent. No passing cars. No airplanes overhead. No phones vibrating beside the bed. No glowing notifications demanding immediate attention. Only wind. Only distant animals. Only darkness. Within a short time, everyone falls asleep. Several peaceful hours pass. Then, sometime around midnight, your eyes slowly open. There is no panic. No confusion. No feeling that something has gone terribly wrong. You expected this. So did everyone else. Perhaps your spouse is already awake. Perhaps your elderly grandmother quietly whispers a prayer. A neighbor across the lane lights a small candle. Somebody steps outside for fresh air beneath an astonishing sky filled with stars untouched by modern light pollution. For roughly an hour, sometimes two, the village gently comes back to life. Not loudly. Not busily. Just enough to acknowledge that the night has reached its quiet middle. Modern readers often assume people would immediately try falling asleep again. Instead, many simply accepted this peaceful interval. Some prayed. Some reflected. Some spoke softly with family members. Others added another log to the fire. A few completed small household tasks. Medical texts from later centuries even suggested this waking period was the ideal time for quiet contemplation because the mind felt especially calm after several hours of rest. It is an oddly comforting image. A world where waking during the night was not considered a problem to solve. Today, countless people lie awake at 3 in the morning wondering whether something is wrong with them. They check the clock. They worry about losing sleep. Ironically, many become so anxious about being awake that falling asleep again becomes even more difficult. A medieval villager might have found this reaction rather puzzling. After all, being awake for a little while was perfectly ordinary. The important thing to remember is that medieval people were not deliberately following a scientific sleep schedule. They were simply responding to the environment around them. Without electric lighting, human biology behaved somewhat differently. For a few precious moments, the world feels almost suspended. During the day, every hour demanded something. Fields needed tending. Animals required feeding. Bread had to be baked. Wells had to be visited. Clothing needed mending. Firewood had to be gathered before winter arrived. Life was filled with constant movement. The middle of the night was different. There was no expectation to rush. No crowded marketplace. No merchant calling out prices. No children chasing one another through muddy streets. Only a quiet pause between yesterday and tomorrow. For many medieval people, this became a rare opportunity to think. Modern life often celebrates productivity. Every spare minute seems to invite another task, another notification, another reason to stay busy. The medieval world, despite being physically demanding, sometimes offered something modern people struggle to find. Stillness. Imagine sitting beside a slowly fading fire while the rest of your family sleeps peacefully around you. The orange glow dances across the wooden walls. The room smells faintly of smoke, wool, and freshly baked bread from the evening meal. You are awake. But there is nowhere you need to be. Many people use this time for prayer. Religion shaped nearly every aspect of medieval life, and the quiet hours after first sleep were often seen as especially suitable for speaking with God. Monastic writings describe nighttime as a period when distractions disappeared and the mind became calmer. Whether or not every villager shared this belief, the silence itself encouraged reflection. Others simply talked. Not long conversations filled with excitement, but quiet discussions that daylight rarely allowed. A husband and wife might speak about the coming harvest. Parents might quietly discuss their children. Older relatives could share memories from decades earlier. These conversations happened without the interruptions of daily work. Ironically, the busiest people sometimes found their greatest peace in the middle of the night. Of course, not everyone stayed indoors. Historical records suggest some people stepped outside during this waking period. Imagine looking upward. Today, many people have never seen a truly dark sky. Artificial lighting washes away thousands of stars before we even notice they're missing. A medieval villager lived beneath something extraordinary. On a clear night, the Milky Way stretched overhead like a glowing river across the heavens. The stars appeared so numerous that counting them would seem impossible. Without telescopes, satellites, or astronomy apps, the sky remained mysterious. Every constellation carried stories. Every bright planet invited questions. Many believed the heavens reflected God's order. Others searched the sky for signs that might explain events on Earth. Some conclusions were surprisingly imaginative. If a comet appeared, people sometimes feared it announced war, famine, or the death of an important ruler. Thankfully, modern astronomy has relieved comets of quite a stressful job description. Still, spending time beneath those brilliant skies must have been unforgettable. There was another practical reason people occasionally woke. Fire. Most medieval homes depended entirely on a central hearth. Keeping a fire alive through the night made mornings much easier. Starting a new fire from scratch was slow, frustrating, and sometimes impossible if everything had become damp. So someone might quietly add another piece of wood or gently stir the remaining embers before returning to bed. It wasn't exciting work. But neither is searching for your phone charger at 6 in the morning. Some tasks simply make tomorrow easier. Animals also demanded occasional attention. A restless cow. A nervous horse. A barking dog responding to movement outside. Living so closely with animals meant complete silence was never guaranteed. The village itself seemed alive, even while sleeping. Interestingly, medieval people often viewed nighttime very differently from modern society. Today, darkness is frequently associated with relaxation. Watch a film. Read a book. Sleep. For many people in the Middle Ages, however, the night remained mysterious. Legends flourished after sunset. Stories of wandering spirits, mischievous fairies, witches, and strange creatures spread from village to village. Parents warned children not to wander alone after dark. Travelers preferred reaching shelter before nightfall whenever possible. Roads became dangerous without daylight. Not only because of supernatural fears, but because real dangers existed too. You could lose your way, fall into a ditch, encounter thieves, or simply twist an ankle on an unseen rock miles from help. History has a habit of reminding us that reality often provides enough danger without adding monsters. Even so, belief shaped experience. If someone genuinely expected to encounter something supernatural, every unusual sound became meaningful. A branch snapping in the woods suddenly seemed less like a deer and more like something far less comforting. Our minds have always been remarkably talented at completing stories before gathering all the evidence. Yet inside the safety of home, the atmosphere felt different. The family remained together. The fire offered warmth. The familiar creaks of the house became reassuring rather than frightening. Eventually, something subtle began to happen. The feeling of wakefulness slowly faded. No alarm clock announced that it was time for second sleep. No watch displayed the hour. People simply listened to their bodies. Eyes became heavy once more. Conversations ended naturally. The fire settled into glowing embers. One by one, everyone lay back beneath their blankets. Within minutes, the cottage returned to silence. Second sleep had begun. And before long, the first hints of dawn would begin creeping across the eastern sky, bringing with them another demanding day in medieval Europe. Morning arrived long before most modern people would consider it reasonable. There were no alarm clocks buzzing from a bedside table. No smartphones playing carefully selected wake-up playlists. No snooze button inviting you to delay responsibility for another 9 minutes. Instead, dawn itself became the signal. As the first pale light crept across the horizon, medieval villages slowly came back to life. Roosters announced the morning with impressive confidence, whether anyone appreciated their enthusiasm or not. Dogs stretched beside dying embers. Farmers opened cottage doors and stepped into cool morning air, already thinking about the work waiting in the fields. For someone who had experienced both a first sleep and a second sleep, the day often began feeling surprisingly complete. They had already rested, awakened, reflected, returned to sleep. Only then did the demands of the day begin. To us, this rhythm feels unusual. To them, it may have felt perfectly ordinary. The important thing to remember is that medieval people did not organize their lives according to the precise hours shown on a clock. Mechanical clocks certainly existed by the later Middle Ages, but they were rare, expensive, and usually found in monasteries, churches, or wealthy towns. Most ordinary villagers measured time differently. The position of the sun, the ringing of church bells, the changing seasons, the length of shadows. Life followed nature far more closely than numbers on a dial. Imagine asking a medieval farmer what time it was. Instead of saying, "It's 6:47, he might simply tell you that the sun was rising, breakfast should soon be finished, and there was far too much work left before sunset. It was a practical way of thinking. After all, crops cared very little about exact minutes. Rain certainly didn't arrive according to anyone's schedule. This natural relationship with daylight influenced sleep more than many modern people realize. Today, electric lighting allows us to stretch the evening almost indefinitely. A person can finish work, watch several hours of television, scroll through social media, answer emails, play games, and still decide to go to bed well after midnight. The human brain evolved under very different conditions. For thousands of years, sunset encouraged rest. Darkness limited activity. Artificial light changed that remarkably quickly. In historical terms, widespread electric lighting is astonishingly recent. Human beings spent countless generations living without it. That is one reason historians find segmented sleep so fascinating. It reminds us that some habits we consider completely normal may actually be products of modern technology rather than timeless human behavior. Of course, life in the Middle Ages was far from peaceful every night. Winter storms rattled fragile homes. Heavy rain leaked through thatched roofs. Strong winds found every tiny gap in wooden walls. Imagine lying awake while a violent storm shook the cottage around you. The fire flickered wildly. The roof groaned. Rain hammered overhead with astonishing force. For medieval families, severe weather wasn't merely inconvenient. It could threaten everything. Flooded fields meant poor harvests. Poor harvests meant hunger. A single season of bad weather could affect an entire community for months. Perhaps that is another reason the quiet hours between first and second sleep became valuable. When daylight demanded constant labor, nighttime offered rare moments to process fears that otherwise remained buried beneath work. People worried about illness, about crops, about children, about aging parents, about the coming winter. Human concerns have changed remarkably little over the centuries. The details may differ. The emotions remain familiar. Interestingly, medieval medicine also viewed sleep differently than modern science. Physicians inherited ideas from ancient Greek and Roman scholars, blending them with newer observations. Many believed proper sleep was essential for balancing the body's natural humors. Health depended upon maintaining harmony within the body. Too much sleep could be harmful. Too little sleep could be equally dangerous. Like many medieval medical theories, some conclusions appear unusual today. Others contain surprising fragments of truth. Doctors sometimes recommended gentle activities during the period between first and second sleep. Quiet conversation, prayer, reflection, avoiding excessive excitement. Considering how difficult it would have been to organize a midnight football match inside a medieval village, this advice was probably easier to follow than it sounds. Not everyone enjoyed restful nights. Illness frequently interrupted sleep. So did pain. Without modern medicine, even relatively minor conditions could become exhausting. Toothaches, joint problems, fevers, persistent coughs. Many people endured discomfort that today might be relieved with a quick visit to a pharmacy. Children also influenced nighttime routines. Parents then, just as now, occasionally discovered that babies possess an extraordinary ability to wake at precisely the moment adults become comfortable. Some traditions truly are timeless. Despite these interruptions, evidence continues to suggest that many people accepted waking during the night without immediately viewing it as a problem. That difference is significant. Modern insomnia often becomes stressful because people fear the consequences of not sleeping. The anxiety itself makes sleep more difficult. Medieval people, expecting to wake naturally between two periods of rest, may have experienced far less concern when it happened. Expectation shapes experience. If you believe something is wrong, your mind searches for danger. If you believe something is normal, the same event feels almost effortless. This simple psychological truth has probably influenced human behavior throughout history. As we continue exploring medieval nights, another surprising question begins to emerge. If so many people were awake for a short time after midnight, what else was happening across the sleeping villages of Europe while most of history quietly passed beneath the stars? The quiet hours between first and second sleep did more than offer a chance to rest. They quietly shaped medieval society in ways that are easy to overlook today. Imagine standing at the edge of a small village just after midnight. From a distance, almost every cottage appears dark. Only here and there does a faint orange glow escape through tiny cracks around a wooden shutter. Someone inside is awake. Not because of an emergency. Not because they cannot sleep. Simply because this is the natural pause between two periods of rest. If you walk slowly through the narrow lanes, you would occasionally hear quiet voices drifting from inside a home. Perhaps an elderly couple speaking softly beside the fire. Perhaps a mother comforting a child who had briefly awakened. Perhaps someone whispering a prayer before lying down once again. The village was asleep. But it was not completely unconscious. It breathed gently through the night. Modern people often imagine medieval evenings ending the moment everyone climbed into bed. The reality was almost certainly more complicated. Human beings have always adapted their routines to the world around them. And in a world without electric light, long winter nights created opportunities that simply do not exist in quite the same way today. Consider the changing seasons. During summer, daylight stretched across much of the day. Farmers often worked from sunrise until sunset, taking advantage of every precious hour. The nights were shorter. The interval between first and second sleep may also have been shorter. Winter transformed everything. Darkness arrived early. Morning came late. The same family suddenly found itself with many more hours inside the cottage. They could not farm frozen ground. They could not repair distant fences in complete darkness. Instead, much of life shifted indoors. These long evenings became opportunities for storytelling. Before books became common, stories were one of humanity's greatest treasures. Grandparents passed legends to grandchildren. Parents repeated tales they themselves had heard decades earlier. Stories entertained. But they also educated. They explained local history. Warned against dangerous places. Preserved family memories. Taught moral lessons. Every generation added tiny details. A forgotten traveler became a brave knight. A large wolf slowly transformed into a terrifying monster. History and imagination have always enjoyed borrowing from one another. Some of these stories almost certainly continued during the peaceful hours after first sleep. Imagine children waking briefly to hear an older relative quietly finishing a tale beside the fading fire. The room feels warm despite the cold outside. Shadows dance across the walls. Every whispered word seems more mysterious in the darkness. It is easy to understand why medieval legends survived for centuries. The setting itself made them unforgettable. Not every midnight activity involved conversation. Many simple household tasks fit naturally into this calm period. Someone might mend clothing by candlelight. Another person might prepare food for the following day. A shepherd expecting an early journey could quietly organize equipment before returning to sleep. These were not noisy jobs. They respected the silence of the night. Even so, they helped the household function more smoothly when dawn arrived. There is something strangely familiar about this. Today, many people use quiet evening hours to prepare lunches, pack bags, or lay out clothes for the next morning. The tools have changed. The habit has not. Of course, candlelight imposed clear limits. Candles and oil lamps were expensive compared with modern electricity. Every extra hour of light consumed valuable resources. Few people wasted them without good reason. As a result, nighttime activity remained modest. The goal was not to turn night into day. It was simply to make gentle use of a naturally wakeful period. Historians also believe this interval strengthened family relationships. Daylight rarely allowed uninterrupted conversation. Everyone had responsibilities. Fields demanded attention. Animals needed care. Meals required preparation. Children worked alongside adults from surprisingly young ages. The middle of the night removed many of those distractions. For a short while, there was nowhere else to be. No field requiring immediate attention. No merchant waiting in the marketplace. No neighbor expecting assistance. Just family. Just quiet. Just time. Perhaps that explains why many historical writings describe nighttime with surprising warmth. Despite the hardships of medieval life, these peaceful moments offered something precious. A chance to slow down. A chance to simply exist. Ironically, modern technology has given us endless opportunities for entertainment while making uninterrupted quiet increasingly rare. Many people now reach for a glowing screen the moment they wake during the night. A medieval villager reached for silence instead. There is a lesson hidden somewhere in that comparison. Not necessarily that one way is better than the other. Only that human beings have lived comfortably under very different rhythms throughout history. As the centuries passed, however, this familiar pattern would slowly begin to disappear. Not because people consciously decided to abandon it, but because the world itself was changing. New technologies. New industries. New schedules. New ideas about work and productivity. Gradually, the peaceful pause between first sleep and second sleep faded from everyday life. Most people never noticed it slipping away. Yet for hundreds of years before that transformation, millions of ordinary men, women, and children accepted it as naturally as watching the sun rise each morning. And the story of how that ancient rhythm quietly vanished is every bit as fascinating as the sleep itself. By the late Middle Ages, Europe was beginning to change in subtle ways. Most villagers would never have described these changes as revolutionary. Life still revolved around farming. Church bells still marked the passing of the day. Families still gathered around the evening fire. Yet beneath the surface, society was slowly becoming more connected, more organized, and eventually more dependent on precise schedules. At first, these changes were almost invisible. A growing town here. A busy marketplace there. A new trade route bringing merchants from distant lands. None of these seemed directly related to sleep. But together, they quietly reshaped daily life. Imagine a craftsman living in a prosperous medieval town instead of a remote farming village. Unlike a farmer, whose work depended almost entirely on the weather, this craftsman answered to customers, apprentices, and guild regulations. Time became more structured. Meetings had to begin. Orders had to be completed. Deliveries had to arrive. The rhythm of life slowly shifted away from nature alone. Churches also played an important role. Throughout medieval Europe, bells rang throughout the day and night. They called people to prayer. Marked important events. Warned of danger. Announced funerals and celebrations. Even people who could not read understood the language of bells. In many ways, they were the public clocks of their age. Imagine lying in bed during your first sleep. Somewhere beyond the village, a distant bell echoes through the darkness. Its sound rolls gently across fields before fading into silence. Without checking a watch, you immediately understand that another part of the night has passed. Time was heard before it was measured. As larger towns developed, mechanical clocks slowly became more common. These early clocks were remarkable achievements of engineering. They did not fit into pockets or hang on kitchen walls. Instead, they towered above marketplaces and church buildings, visible to entire communities. For the first time, large numbers of people could organize their lives around shared hours rather than simply following the rising and setting of the sun. This may seem like a small change. In reality, it transformed human behavior. When everyone agrees exactly when work begins, exactly when markets open, and exactly when meetings take place, sleep gradually becomes more standardized as well. Flexibility gives way to routine. Ironically, routine already existed in medieval life. But now it belonged to the clock rather than the seasons. The Industrial Revolution, centuries later, would accelerate this process dramatically. Factories demanded workers who arrived at fixed times. Railways required precise schedules. Schools adopted regular hours. Modern cities never truly slept. Artificial lighting pushed bedtime later and later. Eventually, the long natural nights that had encouraged segmented sleep became increasingly rare. People stayed awake until much later. When they finally went to bed, there were fewer hours remaining before morning. The quiet waking period slowly disappeared. Not because human biology suddenly changed, but because human lifestyles did. Scientists studying sleep today find this idea fascinating. Some researchers suggest that waking briefly during the night may still be a perfectly natural tendency for many people. The difference is that modern society often interprets it as a problem. Imagine telling a medieval villager that you woke peacefully around midnight. They might smile politely and ask what you did before returning to your second sleep. Imagine telling the same story today. Someone is likely to recommend herbal tea, blackout curtains, white noise, breathing exercises, or an expensive mattress advertised during a podcast. Neither response is necessarily wrong. They simply belong to different worlds. History reminds us that normal changes constantly. Even something as personal as sleep has never remained completely fixed. This realization makes the Middle Ages feel surprisingly close. The people living 700 years ago worried about their families, worked long hours, laughed together, told stories beside the fire, looked up at the stars, and perhaps, somewhere around the middle of the night, quietly opened their eyes before drifting peacefully back into sleep once more. The more we study ordinary lives, the less distant history begins to feel. Kings and battles dominate many history books. But most people were neither kings nor knights. They were ordinary villagers trying to make it through another season. Their greatest concerns were often wonderfully familiar. Would the harvest succeed? Would the children remain healthy? Would winter be harsh? Would tomorrow bring good news? In those questions, centuries begin to disappear. Perhaps that is why the history of sleep feels so strangely comforting. It reminds us that beneath changing technologies, changing governments, and changing civilizations, people have always searched for rest. Not only physical rest, but peace. And for countless medieval villagers, that peace arrived twice every night. As historians continued studying medieval documents, an interesting pattern began to emerge. The references to first sleep and second sleep were not isolated accidents. They appeared again and again. Not always in exactly the same way. Not always in the same country. But often enough to make researchers pause. Imagine opening a handwritten manuscript copied more than 600 years ago. The pages are slightly yellowed. The edges are worn from generations of careful readers. The ink has faded just enough to remind you that countless hands have turned these pages before yours. Halfway through the text, the writer casually mentions someone rising after their first sleep. Then the story simply continues. There is no explanation. No footnote. No lengthy description. To the original audience, none was necessary. This is one of history's most fascinating habits. Ordinary customs rarely receive detailed explanations. People write about what surprises them, not about what everyone already understands. Think about modern conversations. Someone might text a friend, "I'll call you after dinner." Nobody explains what dinner is. Nobody defines the concept of an evening meal. It would feel unnecessary. Future historians studying our messages might conclude that dinner was a universal part of daily life precisely because nobody bothered explaining it. The same logic applies to medieval sleep. Repeated casual references suggest the pattern was familiar to many readers. Of course, historians are careful. Good history depends upon evidence rather than assumptions. No serious scholar claims that every single person across medieval Europe slept in exactly the same way. That would ignore the incredible diversity of medieval life. A fisherman living along the coast experienced different routines than a shepherd in the mountains. A merchant traveling between cities slept differently from a monk inside a monastery. Even neighboring villages developed their own traditions. History rarely fits into perfectly organized boxes. Yet the broader picture remains compelling. When independent records from different centuries and different regions begin pointing towards similar habits, historians pay attention. This is how our understanding of the past slowly grows. Not through one dramatic discovery, but through hundreds of small clues fitting together like pieces of an enormous puzzle. Interestingly, similar patterns have been identified outside medieval Europe as well. Before artificial lighting became widespread, several societies around the world described nighttime in ways that resemble segmented sleep. Although customs varied, the underlying rhythm sometimes appears surprisingly familiar. That raises an intriguing possibility. Perhaps sleeping in two stages was not a strange medieval invention at all. Perhaps it reflected an older human pattern that gradually faded as technology transformed daily life. If that idea is true, then modern sleep may actually be the historical exception rather than the rule. It is an astonishing thought. Something many people now consider completely normal could be relatively recent when measured against the full span of human history. Naturally, historians continue debating the evidence. Some argue segmented sleep was widespread. Others believe it was common only under certain conditions. New discoveries may refine our understanding further. That is one of the strengths of history. It is never completely finished. Every newly translated document, every forgotten diary, every archaeological discovery adds another small piece to humanity's story. Unlike a mystery novel, history rarely reaches a final chapter where every question receives a perfect answer. Instead, our picture becomes gradually clearer with each generation. Perhaps that uncertainty makes the subject even more interesting. The Middle Ages were not populated by strange people living incomprehensible lives. They were ordinary human beings adapting to the world available to them. Without electricity, without alarm clocks, without smartphones glowing beside the bed, they developed routines that suited their environment remarkably well. If we had been born into that same world, we probably would have done exactly the same. History has a quiet way of reminding us that people are often far more alike than different. The clothes change. The languages evolve. Technology advances. Yet the basic rhythms of hope, fear, work, family, curiosity, and rest remain surprisingly constant. Perhaps somewhere tonight, someone listening to this video will wake naturally in the middle of the night. Instead of immediately worrying that something has gone wrong, they may remember the countless medieval villagers who calmly accepted those peaceful hours beneath star-filled skies. Not as an interruption, but simply as another gentle chapter in the night's journey. And maybe, just for a moment, the silence will feel a little less lonely. As our journey through the medieval night comes to an end, one final question remains. What did these people actually lose when the world slowly abandoned first sleep and second sleep? The answer is more complicated than it first appears. Modern life has brought extraordinary advantages. Electric lighting allows hospitals to operate through the night. Cities remain active around the clock. Families separated by thousands of miles can speak instantly through a small device carried in a pocket. Few people would willingly trade those conveniences for life in a 14th century village. History should never be confused with nostalgia. The Middle Ages were beautiful in some ways. They were also incredibly difficult. Disease spread quickly. Food shortages were common. Life expectancy was much shorter. Most families worked harder physically than many of us can easily imagine. Yet even within that demanding world, there were moments of remarkable peace. The quiet hours between first sleep and second sleep offered something increasingly rare today. Uninterrupted silence. No endless stream of news. No advertisements competing for attention. No glowing screen asking for just one more minute. Only darkness. Only stillness. Only the gentle sound of breathing from family members asleep nearby. Imagine stepping outside one final time. The village rests beneath an endless sky. The stars shine with astonishing clarity. A cool breeze moves softly across the fields. In the distance, an owl calls once before disappearing back into the forest. Somewhere nearby, a tiny orange glow flickers behind a cottage window. Another family is awake for a little while. Perhaps someone is quietly praying. Perhaps an elderly woman is adding another log to the fire. Perhaps two parents are whispering about tomorrow's harvest while trying not to wake their children. Within another hour, every light will disappear again. Second sleep will return. Morning will arrive. Life will continue. The rhythm has repeated itself for generations. It feels as dependable as the changing seasons. History often focuses on dramatic events. Great battles. Powerful kings. Famous queens. Political revolutions. spectacular discoveries. Yet most of human history was never lived by famous people. It was lived by ordinary men and women who woke before sunrise, worked until evening, cared for their families, and hoped tomorrow would be slightly kinder than today. Their stories rarely appear in textbooks, but they deserve to be remembered. Sometimes the smallest habits reveal the greatest truths. A sleeping pattern, a family meal, a quiet conversation beside the fire. These ordinary moments connect us across centuries more powerfully than almost anything else. The medieval villagers could never have imagined satellites orbiting above the Earth. They never dreamed of electric light flooding entire cities. They had no concept of airplanes crossing oceans in a matter of hours. And yet, if one of them somehow visited the modern world, they would probably recognize something immediately. People still become tired after long days. Parents still worry about their children. Neighbors still share stories. Friends still laugh together. Couples still whisper about tomorrow before falling asleep. Human nature has remained remarkably consistent. Only the surroundings have changed. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden within the history of sleep. The past is not a foreign country filled with strangers. It is home to people who laughed, worried, hoped, and rested much as we do today. Their nights followed a different rhythm. Their world moved at a slower pace. But their lives were no less human. So the next time you wake briefly during the middle of the night, resist the temptation to think immediately that something has gone terribly wrong. Instead, picture a tiny medieval village wrapped in darkness. Picture smoke rising gently from thatched roofs beneath a sky overflowing with stars. Picture families quietly awake between two peaceful sleeps, waiting patiently for the dawn. For hundreds of years, that rhythm may have been one of the most ordinary experiences in Europe. Today, it feels almost forgotten. History has a remarkable talent for hiding extraordinary stories inside ordinary moments. And sometimes, all we have to do is slow down long enough to notice them. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. Now it's time to let history fade gently into the background. Close your eyes. Relax. And may your own night's sleep, whether it comes in one peaceful chapter or two, be a restful one. Good night.